Hello, my name is Tara Brabazon and I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to vlog 168. Oh, I'm excited, the political economy. And as with vlogs of this oeuvre or type, I dedicate it to you rock. But actually this vlog comes via request from one of our students at Flinders, and a really interesting circumstance happened. Early one afternoon, a student sort of hurried into my office and sat down. I said, what's happening, you all right? And she said, look, I've just been to a seminar and the phrase political economy was used all the way through the seminar, and everyone around the table nodded like they knew what it meant. And I have absolutely no idea what it means. So could you do a vlog on the political economy but not mention my name? And I said, yes, absolutely, that's wonderful. And what I told this lass, and then what a great idea it is. So this is great, and she's very courageous. She's a brilliant, wonderful young woman. And also it takes great courage to know what you don't know. So I thought that was a great moment. But as I explained to her, and I'll now share with you, really there are two groups in our current university sector and system. The first group is those that know exactly what the political economy is and deploy it well and carefully. Not a doubt about that, that's a great group. The second group in our universities either does not know what the political economy is and just ignores the phrase completely, or has absolutely no idea what it is but pretends they do and nod a lot in seminars. So it is a useful phrase and it is being deployed increasingly in our culture, and it has some very interesting uses. So I've been reading recently about, for example, the political economy of medical devices, the political economy of environmental tourism, the political economy of Indigenous sustainability, the political economy of masculinity. Now, I think one of the problems that exists when we have phrases like the political economy, and I also put words like resilience and sustainability into this category, by the way, is when we've got words that are used, indeed overused, through multiple contexts, their meanings start to blunt. And we start to lose the more careful discussions and arguments that we need to have about these quite controversial words and phrases. So let's get into this. Let's talk about the political economy. Let's put in place some definitions. But most importantly, let's walk the phrase around. Let me show you how it can be deployed outside of universities in doing translational research in particular. So the political economy is the study of production and trade and the relationship between production and trade in the context of society, law, and government. Full stop. At its most basic, the political economy looks at the relationship between politics, economics, and society. Put another way, if we put economics into its context, that's a way to think about the political economy. Its study allows us to understand and manage competing interests, competing groups in our culture, and how we in academic life and how we in citizenship more generally balance those competing interests. So let's just use the example we talked about in the vlog last week, the blue economy. Right, this is the competing interest stuff, right? So blue economy. So if we allow a particular mode of fishing and fisheries to develop, then a whole series of other areas of the blue economy will be lost, like carbon capture, for example, Indigenous stewardship, and also, of course, tourism, coastal tourism, regional development may be impacted. So you see those competing interests. If one dominates, then other areas will be lost. The political economy allows us to understand those players and interests, and with some rigour and some care, understand how they are balanced, so we can weigh and measure those competing interests. Its origin comes, of course, from the ancient Greek, as they all do, polis meaning city or state, and oikonomos, and I apologise to all my wonderful Greek friends out there, shocking, I know, but why I love that word in its origins from ancient Greek is it's about the management of an estate, but also the management of a household. Isn't that interesting? So what we learned from this etymology is how a country, how a household is managed and governed, recognising both the political and the economic factors. It explores how political forces shape and frame the economy, and how economic activities generate behaviours that sustain political power. So political economists are interested in who gains and who loses from particular policies. And I like that clarity. I like that rigour a lot. There is, yes, a focus on institutions, there's not a doubt about that, but also regulation, class, gender, regionality, and how all these variables, and there's hundreds of them, shape and frame economic outcomes. There's also attention to what's often termed macro movements, so human rights, neoliberalism, the environment, financialisation, business cycles. Yeah. It's deployed in a range of disciplines like politics and economics, like obviously, but also history, the law, incredibly important to jurisprudence, but also an array of the sciences, particularly ecology, political economy, very useful in ecology as we consider the political framing and valuing of some disciplines over others. So if we did a political economy of a university, for example, why some disciplines are funded better than others, why some knowledge systems, some methods are seen to be more valuable than others. Interesting discussion, that one. So the University of Sydney quite wonderfully has a major in the political economy as part of an array of their bachelor programs, and I love this. And they describe on their website the value of this major as, quote, leadership for good. Leadership for good. I love that phrase. I love that imperative and intent. And of course, what you're picking up from the debate already is if we're talking about leadership, anyone who makes decisions, any mode of leadership requires a grasp of the political economy, because that means you have to balance out competing interests, the individual and the state perhaps, or the public and the private. The earliest scholars of the political economy were obviously Adam Smith and David Ricardo, although there are lots of different heritages. There's a lot of archaeology of knowledge going on with the political economy, and obviously through the 19th century in particular, there was a relatively unproductive blurring, I would argue, between economics and the political economy, and that complexity emerged through the arrival, obviously, of Karl Marx. And so when the political economy is used today, there is often a Marxian tenor to it, but that's not only from Karl Marx, but also from the Chicago School. So there is a Marxian imperative. Having said that, the phrase is used much more broadly than that. At its most basic, I suppose, it looks at how economics can become more representative, and we start to think about major economic questions in context. So the political economy is an interdisciplinary study, and it has three ways of doing it, if you will, three modes of analysis. So here's this concept, that's great. How does it work in practice, in research, in policy? Right, three ways it's used. The first way is the macro level, or the country analysis. So how the selection of political leaders is actioned, how a budget and budgetary priorities are put in place. There's also attention to interest groups within a national economy, and also the rules and the parameters of the political players. So for example, Donald Trump's use of Twitter in managing international affairs and the economic imperatives of the United States. That's new. So Donald Trump's use of Twitter is very interesting as a topic in the political economy. Okay, the second level of analysis that we use when we're doing the political economy is what's called a sector level analysis. So the forces that shape particular policies and decision making in a particular sector or in a particular industry. I do this one a fair amount. So this might manifest, for example, how a community organisation that represents men and women with a disability, with an impairment, how attention from that group is placed on how to leverage and activate a discussion about rights, about visibility, about space, and perhaps about universal design. But this mode of analysis is always used with a diversity of industry groups. It could be the mining industry, it could be the banking industry, it could be the popular music industry. So what forces impact on policy configuration, whether it is taxation policy or environmental policy, or for example, intellectual property rights. So the role and function and discussion about intellectual property rights and copyright in the popular music industry is incredibly important. So that's an example of what occurs there. There is a third mode of analysis that is called the problem-based analysis of the political economy. Problem-based, problem-driven. This is often seen to be the most practical mode of analysis. Again, I use this a great deal, and it's probably the mode I most frequently use, although if you go through my 19 books, each of these three modes of analysis I've used in different books. But when you're doing sector level analysis, that's when you're doing work like cultural mapping of a particular industry. So when I've done that work for local governments, for example, it starts with that sector-based analysis. So I look at their music industry, I look at their sporting or leisure industries, I look at their tourist industries, right? So that works very well with local government when I'm developing a creative industry strategy. But the problem-driven analysis starts, and no surprise here, ladies and gentlemen, with a problem that is required to be solved. And this is where it works incredibly well. So, okay, we've got a problem to solve in local government, in a community organisation, in a group, right? So we've got a problem. So the first thing we do is we look at the participants in this problem. Who are the groups? Who are the competing interests? What are their motivations? And what institutions have a role in this particular problem? Now, the World Bank very often uses this mode of analysis, assessing policy reform. So when the World Bank is dealing with a lot of nations or regions around the world, regions that are undergoing trouble, and they're trying to create strategies for growth or indeed poverty reduction, this problem-driven approach works incredibly well. So the type of questions that are asked in this mode of the political economy is, what is the best mix of public and private ownership? So for example, that works well in discussions of healthcare, superannuations and pensions and so forth. Then, how do particular groups outside of government influence policy? So donations to political parties, for example, or say protests on the street. How do we manage corruption in particular industries? Who gains from an effective service delivery in an area, and what's the impact of that effective service delivery on other areas of the economy? So another great way to think about this when we're dealing with an individual industry is, what are the dominant ideologies? What are the dominant truths that exist in a particular industry at the moment? And how do we understand those ideologies when leveraging for change? Whether it be changing regulation, changing taxation rules, for example, or changes to the environment and environmental policy. That allows us to think about how decisions are made in an organisation. This has been very important for me with all the policy work I do, particularly with local governments or local councils around the world. Who makes decisions? Where are those decisions made? Who are the decision makers? And it's often not the people with the title. It occupies and exists in different space. And also, when a policy is implemented, trying to predict what are the bottlenecks in the system so we can do it, but will the outcomes occur? Will the solution, will the change get through? And who will win and who will lose from a particular reform? So as you can see, if you make a decision, whatever your field, whatever your discipline, whatever your theory, whatever your interest, whatever your politics, if you make a decision, then you can gain something from thinking in and thinking through the political economy. If you're interested in thinking about the conditions for change, how you make change, then the political economy and these three strategies will help you do that. And a recent story from the Financial Times, I think, really captures the diversity of ideas and also the currency of the political economy at the moment. So Nigella Neighboulder wrote a remarkable article in the Financial Times titled "The Political Economy of Mount Everest is Unstable. I always love it when a title gives you the argument. The political economy of Mount Everest is unstable. And obviously the writer was addressing the traffic jam that currently exists with climbers on Everest. And I'm recording this in June 2019, and already, is it 19? I think it's 19 climbers have lost their lives climbing in this season. So this is not sustainable. But what this piece shows is, here are all the competing interests in Mount Everest. How fascinating is this? And if we simply reduce the number of climbers, so one strategy is, let's just cut the number of permits we give to climbers. But of course that has a huge consequence on the economy of Nepal and the Nepalese people, because tourism is the foundation of their economy. So that's not going to work. So what do? And the solution provided in this piece was to diversify the climbs. There's so many interesting, challenging climbing experiences in Nepal. One way to balance out Mount Everest is to start to promote and talk about, so change the tourism industry, do a cultural mapping of the tourism industry and show all the different types of climbs that are available. So therefore, we've still got a large number of people coming to Nepal to develop the economy of that nation. But having also said that, there's not the risk mitigation or the traffic jams going up to Mount Everest because there are diversity of climbs. There's the political economy. Thanks. So as you can see, the political economy, I believe, is going to become more and more important through our lifetimes, because resources are finite in all industries, and that includes human resources. And decisions, tough decisions, are going to have to be made about best use or appropriate use. And to be frank with you, we need to think about, all of us as a culture, let alone as intellectuals, what does best use mean? What does appropriate use mean? And not use them as glib cliches. Drill down, define it, talk about it, have a debate about it. And that's a way, I think, that we future-proof our society, our political system, and also our economy. And it is occurring and emerging very strongly in PhD programs. Quite wonderfully, Stanford offers an entire PhD program in political economics, and they focus in that program on, and I love this as an imperative, rational choice, collective action, understanding political institutions, competition, and also working very deeply in behavioural economics, which again is a fascinating area of study. Publishers also are moving into this area. Roman and Littlefield, a fascinating publisher, have a brand new series with some fascinating books emerging on the global political economies of gender and sexuality. Fascinating, really innovative publishing happening there, I think. So at its best, the political economy framework encourages rational, considered, evidence-based analyses. It's also a great way to balance competing forces. For us as scholars, it has interesting interdisciplinarity. It's provocative in its interdisciplinarity. It also has great attention to sort of the macro issues, but it never ever forgets about the individual. And look, the political economy, not a bad way to spend your day, eh? I wish you love, light, and peace. Tea out.